you hear this story, understand one thing. This house was never empty. The family moved in believing they were alone. They were wrong. Every night, something shifted behind the walls, listening, waiting, watching. And once it knew they were there, it never stopped. The house had become a prison, a twisted maze of fear and shadows, and the Thompsons could no longer tell where the walls ended and the woman began. Emma's once innocent face was now pale and drawn, her eyes wide and unblinking as she whispered secrets in the voice of the woman, recounting events from decades ago, events so cruel and violent they made the parents' stomachs churn. Jake tried to confront her one night, demanding the entity show itself, but the walls responded first. A series of violent echoing bangs shook the floors and ceilings, plaster fell in jagged chunks, and the temperature dropped sharply, freezing their breath in midair. Their mother tried to call for help, but the phone line hissed with static, and a hollow voice whispered directly into the receiver, "You cannot leave." Objects flew through rooms like missiles, shattering furniture, and the dog's absence now felt like a haunting presence, its faint whimpers echoing from the walls as if mocking them. Emma drew furiously on the walls, creating twisted depictions of the woman reaching out, her hands long and skeletal, pressing from the plaster as though testing the limits of her confinement. Shadows danced violently in every corner, forming shapes that were unmistakably human, yet distorted and impossible. The family realized with bone-deep terror that the woman was no longer content to remain behind the walls. Her consciousness now pervaded the entire house, bending it to her will. Every sound, every movement, every breath was met with resistance. The walls seemed to pulse with life, and the horrifying truth settled in. They were no longer inhabitants of a home, but prisoners in a living nightmare, and the woman was preparing to step fully into their world, patient, relentless, and utterly unforgiving. The Thompsons were teetering on the edge of madness, the house now a labyrinth of shifting walls and creeping shadows that seemed to exist solely to torment them. Emma's whispers had grown into urgent, frantic messages, often repeating the same chilling phrase, "She's ready." Jake tried to confront the entity by breaking through walls, hammering and prying at plaster, but every attempt only seemed to anger her, eliciting a symphony of violent crashes, screams that echoed through the floors, and a suffocating sense of being watched from every direction. Their parents were no longer able to sleep, haunted by visions of a pale, hollow-eyed woman pressing herself against the walls, her hands clawing outward as though she could reach them through the plaster at any moment. The family tried to leave, but hallways twisted into impossible corridors. Doors led to rooms they had never seen, and windows revealed nothing but darkness, as if the house itself had grown and absorbed the surrounding world. Objects now moved with deliberate intent, flying across rooms, smashing into walls, and leaving behind jagged marks that pulsed with a strange, almost living energy. The air carried a metallic, acrid scent, thick and choking, making every breath a battle. Emma began speaking in a voice that wasn't entirely hers, recounting events that had never occurred in this world, detailing the life of the woman trapped within, her anger and despair palpable with every syllable. The Thompsons understood a terrifying truth. The woman was no longer just a spirit within the walls. She was the house, the walls, the air, and the very floors beneath their feet, and she was finally ready to step fully into the living world, dragging them with her if they could not escape her wrath. The Thompsons were running out of time, their home no longer a safe place, but a living, breathing nightmare that anticipated their every move. Emma had stopped sleeping altogether, often sitting in the dark corners of the house, whispering to the walls as if she could reason with the entity, while Jake's attempts to intervene were met with violent resistance, walls groaning, floors shaking, and objects flying across rooms with terrifying force. Their parents were now completely consumed by fear, hearing faint, agonized cries coming from the walls, mixed with whispers that shifted suddenly from desperate to cruel, promising doom. One night, a horrific sound filled the house, like 1,000 nails scraping simultaneously, and the family realized it was coming from beneath the floors as well as the walls. Emma screamed, pointing at the living room wall, claiming she could see the woman's face pressing through the plaster, her hollow eyes staring directly at them, her mouth moving in silent words that threatened their lives. Hallways twisted unnaturally, and doors no longer led to the rooms they knew. The house itself had become a maze controlled by the entity, designed to trap them forever. The air was thick, metallic, and suffocating, carrying the unmistakable scent of decay, and every shadow seemed to twitch with intent. They understood a horrifying truth. The woman's consciousness had grown beyond the confines of the walls. Her presence saturated the entire house, waiting for the perfect moment to fully emerge. The Thompsons were consumed by fear, their home no longer a place of shelter, but a sentient, malevolent force that seemed to anticipate every thought and movement. Emma had begun speaking almost entirely in the voice of the woman, describing her past life in excruciating detail, how she had been trapped, abandoned, and consumed by rage, and how she now hungered for freedom. Jake attempted to confront the entity physically, striking the walls with tools and fists, but the response was immediate. The plaster shook violently, a loud groaning echoed from the floors, and shards of wall flew like deadly projectiles, narrowly missing them. Their parents could hear whispers everywhere, in the vents, beneath the floorboards, even inside the very walls themselves, soft at first, then rapidly escalating into hissing threats and mournful cries that seemed impossibly close. Emma screamed one night that the woman was pressing herself outward, testing her strength against the confines of the plaster, and when the family shone flashlights on the walls, they could see faint, grotesque impressions of hands and a hollow face stretching toward them. Doors that once led to familiar rooms now twisted into impossible angles. Hallways seemed to stretch endlessly, and windows opened to nothing but pitch-black voids. Every breath carried a metallic, choking smell, thick and oppressive, and the family could feel a palpable pressure, as if the house itself was pressing in on them. The horrifying truth became undeniable. The woman was no longer confined to the walls. Her consciousness had fully permeated the house, making it a living, vengeful entity. The Thompsons realized that the moment of confrontation was unavoidable, that the entity was ready to emerge fully into their world, and that nothing they had tried so far could stop her. The Thompsons were trapped in a nightmare that had grown too large, too alive, and too angry to ignore. Emma now refused to leave her room, claiming the woman in the walls had claimed the entire house and was watching their every move, while Jake and their parents lived in constant terror, moving cautiously as if even a single sound might provoke her wrath. The walls groaned and shifted around them, creating impossible angles and hallways that twisted like the inside of some monstrous creature, while shadows moved independently of light, coiling and stretching into forms that resembled the woman herself. Scratches across the plaster deepened into gashes, and small skeletal fingers pressed from the walls as if she were testing the boundaries of her prison. One night, Emma screamed hysterically that the woman had reached through the wall and grazed her arm, leaving a faint, icy mark that burned and throbbed. Objects no longer obeyed gravity. Chairs, picture frames, and books hurled themselves at walls and ceilings, leaving cracks and splintered wood, and every sound in the house seemed amplified, echoing with a malicious intelligence. The air was thick with the smell of iron and decay, and every corner carried a palpable sense of being watched, judged, and hunted. The Thompsons finally understood the chilling truth. The woman was no longer just trapped behind the walls. She had merged with the house itself. The Thompsons were living on the brink of total terror, their home now completely dominated by the presence of the woman in the walls, who had grown bold, aggressive, and unstoppable. Emma no longer spoke in her own voice, only repeating the hollow, echoing words of the entity, describing in horrifying detail how she would finally step out, claiming the house and everyone inside as her own. Jake tried desperately to force the family out, smashing doors and windows, but the house itself resisted, walls bending, hallways stretching impossibly, and ceilings lowering as if the very structure was alive and watching. Objects hurled themselves at the family with deliberate precision, breaking furniture, shattering mirrors, and leaving splinters and gouges that seemed to pulse with dark energy. The parents could feel icy hands brushing against their skin in empty rooms, hear whispers that shifted from sorrowful to malicious, and see fleeting glimpses of a pale, hollow-eyed woman pressing her face and fingers through cracks in the plaster. Emma screamed that the woman was coming for them, and the walls themselves responded, groaning and cracking violently, plaster falling in chunks, and the entire house trembling as though preparing to open its arms and swallow them whole. The metallic, suffocating scent of decay filled every room, and the family understood the terrifying reality. The woman was no longer confined. The house was her body, and they were her prey. Every attempt to resist only strengthened her. Every moment of fear fueled her power, and there was no escaping what had been waiting patiently for decades. The Thompsons were on the verge of complete collapse, powerless against a force that was no longer just a spirit, but a living, sentient horror, ready to emerge fully into the world and consume them entirely. The house had become an unbearable nightmare, every corner, every wall, every floor vibrating with the presence of the woman who had once been trapped within, now fully awake and almost tangible in her wrath. Emma's whispers had transformed into desperate screams as the entity pressed outward, her hollow eyes and skeletal fingers now visible through cracks, stretching impossibly as though testing the limits of the walls. Jake tried one last desperate attempt to escape, throwing open doors and windows, but hallways twisted into endless corridors. Rooms shifted inexplicably, and the very structure of the house resisted their flight. Objects flew with furious precision, crashing into walls and ceilings, while icy gusts swept through the rooms, carrying the metallic, choking scent of decay. Their parents could feel invisible hands brushing against them, hear whispers that spoke directly into their minds, promising suffering and despair if they attempted to leave. For a terrifying moment, it felt as though the house itself was alive, breathing, pulsing, and preparing to swallow them whole. Emma's terrified eyes met their parents', and in a voice that was not entirely her own, she whispered, "She's free, and we are hers." Then, as the house groaned and the walls quivered violently, the family felt themselves being pressed inward, reality warping around them until everything went silent. The house returned to an eerie stillness, as if nothing had happened, yet the scratches on the walls, the faint outlines of hands, and the cold, metallic scent lingering in the air told a different story, one that suggested the woman had not been vanquished, only biding her time, waiting for the next family foolish enough to call the house home. And so, the terrifying truth remains. She lives in the walls, patient, eternal, and watching, a horror that will never truly leave, and a reminder that some things are meant to remain undisturbed. The family never returned to the house. They never spoke publicly about what happened, but years later, the property remains untouched. No one stays there for long, and here's the part that matters. The sounds only happen when someone is inside. So tonight, when your house goes quiet and you hear something you can't explain, remember this story. Some things don't haunt houses, they hide in them.